Hey everyone! What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If Fusion Deck User in a different Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Quick update. The series What If Fusion Deck User in a different Yu-Gi-Oh! GX will be going on hold soon, since we're nearly at the end of the story. So now, I need your help picking the next project for the channel. I'm currently deciding between these three fanfics. What if creating the strongest Strawhat crew by reading manga? What if Reincarnated in Bleach as Toshiro Hitsugaya? What if Reincarnated in Marvel as a gamer? Please vote in the poll and let me know which story you'd like to see next. I'll take the top pick and start working on that series next. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 546. Welcome, Amaji Boy. Inside Industrial Illusions, Hikaru followed Anselm through the holographic corridor. Not far ahead, a man walked toward them. The man had long silver-white hair and wore a formal red gentleman's coat. His hair draped over his left eye, concealing it. He clapped as he approached, greeting Hikaru with a warm smile. His accent was peculiar. You couldn't call it broken English. He was, after all, a born and bred American whose father owned a massive casino in Las Vegas. He was the son of a mega-billionaire. But to call his speech normal wouldn't be right either, because his words seemed to flow like a song, rising and falling in strange cadences, as if he were performing in an opera. Mr. Pegasus, it's a pleasure to meet you. Hikaru returned the greeting. Then he glanced at his surroundings. This place. Hikaru had a faint sense of familiarity. Ho ho ho, that's right, Amaji Boy. The place you're standing in right now is the very spot where Kaiba Boy and I once dueled. Just as he thought. When Hikaru first arrived, he'd felt a vague recognition. The surroundings seemed faintly familiar, even though he had never been to Industrial Illusions before. Now, seeing the equipment and virtual imaging machines laid out everywhere, along with the massive dual platform large enough for several people to stand on, the feeling of familiarity only grew stronger. Still, he hadn't expected to be brought to a place like this right away. He felt a quiet thrill of excitement. But after that excitement faded, he suddenly looked back at Pegasus, a flash of surprise in his eyes. Pegasus maintained his smile. Hikaru hesitated for a moment, then placed his hand on the emerald tablet and asked, with slight hesitation, "I've heard that Mr. Pegasus possesses the ability to read people's thoughts." Hikaru knew this wasn't the most appropriate question to ask at a time like this, but having his innermost thoughts detected in an instant had triggered his instincts. He chose to address it directly. Of course that's true. Pegasus said it openly, without a hint of shame. President. So it really is true. Chumley and Anselm couldn't help but exclaim. The two of them had always been curious about the rumors of Pegasus's mind reading. At first glance, both seemed successful and cheerful, but Chumley had spent years as a recluse in the Duel Academy dormitory, and Anselm, despite his entertaining persona, was actually a pessimist at heart. Neither was the type to ask Pegasus directly. But they were both genuinely curious, so when Hikaru asked, they watched Pegasus with eager interest. The others, like the Paradox brothers and Pegasus's bodyguards, didn't react as strongly. They were longtime employees, after all. They knew a thing or two about Pegasus's secrets. But Hikaru was confused. Shouldn't Pegasus have lost this mind-reading ability by now? Hikaru frowned. In the original series, Pegasus had originally made his name as a painter. But when his lover died young, he abandoned his dream of becoming an artist. Searching for a way to bring her back, he traveled to Egypt and obtained the Millennium Eye, which granted him the power to read minds. But at this point in the timeline, his Millennium Eye should have been gone for a long time. How could he still do this? Mind reading wasn't an innate ability like Sartorius's. Could it really be retained? Sorry about that, Amaji boy. Pegasus gently rubbed his forehead. I didn't mean to read your thoughts just now. What was going on? Hikaru was puzzled. Pegasus shook his head lightly, turned around, and gestured for everyone to follow. They passed through some of the memorial structures at the front of Industrial Illusions, gradually entering the more cutting-edge and streamlined design floor of the company. As they walked, a curly-haired designer stepped out of a studio. Upon seeing Pegasus, he hastily bowed, then fell into step behind them. Good work, Mr. Franz. No, not at all, Mr. Pegasus. The gray-haired, curly-topped man waved it off, while shooting Chumley a smug, eyebrow-waggling look. Franz. Now there was a genius designer. Hikaru remembered this man. In the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, card design wasn't a simple matter. Many cards came into existence only after the spirit already existed. For example, the 3 Egyptian god cards that Pegasus created were based on ancient stone tablets that already existed. Pegasus had used his personal abilities to design the god cards, and then the god souls transferred into those cards. Likewise, after the god cards departed this world alongside the nameless pharaoh's soul, it was Pegasus who used his personal abilities to produce a replica of the winged dragon of Ra for research purposes. Another example was Aster's father, the infamous Doomsday card creator, Mr. Phoenix. Whether in the anime or the manga, the bodiless or disembodied bosses all relied on his extraordinary design talent to create vessel cards or cards that could break their seals. The planetary series, Destiny Hero Blue D, all of it depended on him. But Mr. Phoenix wasn't the only designer in all of GX, and not every catastrophe could be blamed on him. For instance, Chumley had later become a card designer himself, creating new environments and cards for Jaden. In the original series, this world also had other outstanding designers, including the man standing before them now, Franz. Unlike Chumley, who prioritized artistry and design sensibility, Franz's philosophy was simple. Duelists pursued ever stronger cards, so the cards he designed were powerful above all else. It was precisely because of this mindset that, in the original series, Pegasus awarded the annual Best Designer prize to Chumley instead, causing Franz, who had always craved Pegasus's recognition, to resent Chumley. To some degree, he had developed jealousy toward him. Under those circumstances, Franz had stolen the replica of the winged dragon of Ra that Pegasus had made for research and entered the GX tournament with it. A normal person couldn't use a god card. Touching a god meant receiving divine punishment. But Franz was a genius. The card he designed, Mound of the Bound Creator, could even restrain the will of Ra itself, allowing him to wield the winged dragon of Ra in a duel against Jaden. That feat alone put every other designer of his generation so far behind him they couldn't even see his back. It was precisely because Franz had this kind of talent that Pegasus had always valued him and wanted to nurture his growth. Unfortunately, Franz didn't understand Pegasus's design philosophy. Power was one aspect, but what mattered more was design sensibility. From the looks of it, in this world, Franz hadn't stolen the winged dragon of Ra, but he was still constantly butting heads with Chumley. Actually, I discovered this quite some time ago. Pegasus walked alongside his 2 most valued designers and Anselm, the Duel Academy representative selected by Industrial Illusions, explaining things to Hikaru as they went. That's right, just as you all suspect, I do possess the ability to read minds. But that was a very, very long time ago. Pegasus spoke as he walked at a steady pace. Over a decade ago, I wanted to resurrect my lover. I gave in to dark impulses and forced quite a few people to duel me. Back then, I obtained one of the legendary Millennium items that are spoken of to this day. Yes, those stories aren't exaggerations. Yugi Boy truly did experience all of that. Pegasus clasped his hands behind his back, not touching the socket of his left eye. The Millennium item I possessed, the Millennium Eye, could read people's hearts, letting me see what others were thinking. That's why I was unstoppable. But later, he continued. After losing to Yugi, he gave up on his previous ambitions and prepared to settle down as a wealthy executive. But then he was ambushed and the eye was taken from him. After that, he was just an ordinary middle-aged man. At most, a talented one who could create Blue Eyes Shining Dragon, whose artistic accomplishments were unrivaled in the world. The Paradox brothers listened to Pegasus's self-introduction, the corners of their mouths twitching. In any case, after that, Pegasus hadn't been particularly fixated on anything. He simply ran industrial illusions, pushed forward the development of dual monsters, and, following his own tastes, created all manner of toon monsters for his personal collection. He had basically stopped involving himself in other matters. Even in the original GX series, aside from the incident with his own designer, the only reason he got involved was because he discovered the Light of Destruction and discussed it with his acquaintance, Chancellor Shepard. After all, the Light of Destruction was a cosmic-level disaster that genuinely threatened the entire planet. But Pegasus stopped in front of a massive laboratory, turned around, clasped his hands behind his back, and spoke to the group with a gentle smile. About 2 years ago, I suddenly realized that I could hear someone's inner thoughts again. What? Whoa! 2 years ago? Hikaru listened to the story with fascination. Pegasus nodded and continued. At first, he thought he was hearing things, that he was still imagining himself as the man who once wielded a Millennium item. But as the voices he heard grew more precise, he gradually realized that he truly could hear people's thoughts again. Initially, he was quite nervous, because he was aware of Sartorius's situation. He was one of the few people in this world who had detected the Light of Destruction early and begun preparing countermeasures. So he knew the Light of Destruction could amplify such abilities, making those infected by its power more prone to destruction and ruin. But over time, he realized his situation was different from Sartorius's. Though he could indeed hear people's thoughts again, he couldn't actively probe someone's mind. It was more like a returning gift, a residual bonus. Then he began considering another possibility: spirit adaptability. Originally, he hadn't possessed any spiritual power. He couldn't see spirits at all. Without the Millennium item, he was virtually incapable of any of that. But with the emergence of dimensional exploration and the development of the concept of spirit adaptability, Pegasus, as the world's premier designer and president of industrial illusions, naturally made an effort to train this ability. Setting everything else aside, being able to see spirits was tremendously appealing to Pegasus. At the very least, if he could see his toon monsters, he would be overjoyed. So, alongside his work, Pegasus had been studying methods to improve spirit adaptability. Over the past few years, he had gradually raised it to an impressively high level, reaching roughly 9-star caliber, far surpassing Hikaru, who had only been studying for about 2 years. In fact, it was pretty much in line with my hypothesis, Pegasus said with a smile. Though the Millennium item was gone, as his spirit adaptability increased, he had regained the ability to hear others' inner thoughts. And it seemed that the higher his spirit adaptability climbed, the clearer the voices became. It was for this reason that, earlier this year, he heard Franz's inner confusion and lack of understanding toward his decisions. After watching Hikaru's duels and experiencing a burst of inspiration, Pegasus created Keeper of Dragon Magic, a card specifically designed to support fusion, and used it to convey his philosophy to all his designers. Power was always secondary. The designers at Industrial Illusions should always aim for a balance of design, spirit, strength, and artistry. Purely chasing power was not the mindset a designer should have. Using this reborn mind-reading ability, he resolved the small conflict within the company, guided Franz's thinking, and prevented Franz from wasting his time on resentment. As for the rivalry between Franz and Chumley, Pegasus wasn't too concerned about that. People needed competition to grow faster. Besides, without someone chasing him, Chumley had the temperament of a sloth. In short, this mind-reading ability left Pegasus very satisfied. It felt as though he had returned to the old days. As expected of Mr. Pegasus. That's incredible. Franz, Pegasus's #1 fanboy, immediately shouted with excitement, not minding in the slightest that his own thoughts had been read. But Pegasus closed his eyes. The second but. The smile on his face gradually faded. It was true that mind reading was an extraordinarily powerful ability. Countless gamblers dreamed of obtaining it, of being able to effortlessly read a dealer's movements and know exactly which choice would hit the jackpot. However, having grown up seeing through the foolishness of gamblers, and having once become a gambler himself in pursuit of reviving his lover, Pegasus understood all too well that nothing in this world came for free. Just as the Millennium Eye had been gifted to him all those years ago, it had never truly been luck. So for the past year, he had been researching and exploring why he had regained this mind-reading ability. And then, he finally found the answer. Now then, everyone, brace yourselves. Pegasus turned back around and signaled his 2 bodyguards to open the door. The bodyguards exchanged a glance, nodded, approached the massive door, and began entering the passcode to disengage the mechanical lock. It was precisely because he had this kind of talent that Pegasus had always valued him and wanted to nurture his growth. Unfortunately, Franz didn't understand Pegasus's design philosophy. Power was one aspect, but what mattered more was design sensibility. From the looks of it, in this world, Franz hadn't stolen the winged dragon of RA, but he was still constantly butting heads with Chumley. Actually, I discovered this quite some time ago. Pegasus walked alongside his 2 most valued designers and Anselm, the Dual Academy representative selected by Industrial Illusions, explaining things to Hikaru as they went. That's right, just as you all suspect, I do possess the ability to read minds. But that was a very, very long time ago. Pegasus spoke as he walked at a steady pace. Over a decade ago, I wanted to resurrect my lover. I gave in to dark impulses and forced quite a few people to duel me. Back then, I obtained one of the legendary Millennium items that are spoken of to this day. Yes, those stories aren't exaggerations. Yugi Boy truly did experience all of that. Pegasus clasped his hands behind his back, not touching the socket of his left eye. The Millennium item I possessed, the Millennium Eye, could read people's hearts, letting me see what others were thinking. That's why I was unstoppable. But later, he continued. After losing to Yugi, he gave up on his previous ambitions and prepared to settle down as a wealthy executive. But then he was ambushed and the eye was taken from him. After that, he was just an ordinary middle-aged man. At most, a talented one who could create Blue Eye's shining dragon, whose artistic accomplishments were unrivaled in the world. The Paradox brothers listened to Pegasus's self-introduction, the corners of their mouths twitching. In any case, after that, Pegasus hadn't been particularly fixated on anything. He simply ran Industrial Illusions, pushed forward the development of dual monsters, and, following his own tastes, created all manner of toon monsters for his personal collection. He had basically stopped involving himself in other matters. Even in the original GX series, aside from the incident with his own designer, the only reason he got involved was because he discovered the Light of Destruction and discussed it with his acquaintance, Chancellor Shepard. After all, the Light of Destruction was a cosmic-level disaster that genuinely threatened the entire planet. But Pegasus stopped in front of a massive laboratory, turned around, clasped his hands behind his back, and spoke to the group with a gentle smile. About 2 years ago, I suddenly realized that I could hear someone's inner thoughts again. What? Whoa! 2 years ago? Hikaru listened to the story with fascination. Pegasus nodded and continued. At first, he thought he was hearing things, that he was still imagining himself as the man who once wielded a Millennium item. But as the voices he heard grew more precise, he gradually realized that he truly could hear people's thoughts again. Initially, he was quite nervous. Because he was aware of Sartorius's situation. He was one of the few people in this world who had detected the Light of Destruction early and begun preparing countermeasures. So he knew the Light of Destruction could amplify such abilities, making those infected by its power more prone to destruction and ruin. But over time, he realized his situation was different from Sartorius's. Though he could indeed hear people's thoughts again, he couldn't actively probe someone's mind. It was more like a returning gift, a residual bonus. Then he began considering another possibility. Spirit adaptability. Originally, he hadn't possessed any spiritual power. He couldn't see spirits at all. Without the Millennium item, he was virtually incapable of any of that. But with the emergence of dimensional exploration and the development of the concept of spirit adaptability, Pegasus, as the world's premier designer and president of industrial illusions, naturally made an effort to train this ability. Setting everything else aside, being able to see spirits was tremendously appealing to Pegasus. At the very least, if he could see his toon monsters, he would be overjoyed. So, alongside his work, Pegasus had been studying methods to improve spirit adaptability. Over the past few years, he had gradually raised it to an impressively high level, reaching roughly 9-star caliber, far surpassing Hikaru, who had only been studying for about 2 years. In fact, it was pretty much in line with my hypothesis, Pegasus said with a smile. Though the Millennium item was gone, as his spirit adaptability increased, he had regained the ability to hear others' inner thoughts. And it seemed that the higher his spirit adaptability climbed, the clearer the voices became. It was for this reason that, earlier this year, he heard Franz's inner confusion and lack of understanding toward his decisions. After watching Hikaru's duels and experiencing a burst of inspiration, Pegasus created Keeper of Dragon Magic, a card specifically designed to support fusion, and used it to convey his philosophy to all his designers. Power was always secondary. The designers at Industrial Illusions should always aim for a balance of design, spirit, strength, and artistry. Purely chasing power was not the mindset a designer should have. Using this reborn mind-reading ability, he resolved the small conflict within the company, guided Franz's thinking, and prevented Franz from wasting his time on resentment. As for the rivalry between Franz and Chumley, Pegasus wasn't too concerned about that. People needed competition to grow faster. Besides, without someone chasing him, Chumley had the temperament of a sloth. In short, this mind-reading ability left Pegasus very satisfied. It felt as though he had returned to the old days. As expected of Mr. Pegasus. That's incredible. Franz, Pegasus's #1 fanboy, immediately shouted with excitement, not minding in the slightest that his own thoughts had been read. But Pegasus closed his eyes. The second but. The smile on his face gradually faded. It was true that mind reading was an extraordinarily powerful ability. Countless gamblers dreamed of obtaining it, of being able to effortlessly read a dealer's movements and know exactly which choice would hit the jackpot. However, having grown up seeing through the foolishness of gamblers, and having once become a gambler himself in pursuit of reviving his lover, Pegasus understood all too well that nothing in this world came for free. Just as the Millennium Eye had been gifted to him all those years ago, it had never truly been luck. So for the past year, he had been researching and exploring why he had regained this mind-reading ability. And then, he finally found the answer. Now then, everyone, brace yourselves. Pegasus turned back around and signaled his 2 bodyguards to open the door. The bodyguards exchanged a glance, nodded, approached the massive door, and began entering the passcode to disengage the mechanical lock. Then, after the electronic lock disengaged and the first layer of the door opened, what appeared before them was yet another door, sealed with a metal spiral lock. The 2 bodyguards strained to turn the mechanism. Several people couldn't help but swallow hard. Pegasus's grave warning to be careful, combined with the multiple layers of sealed doors, filled them with mounting pressure and tension. The 2 bodyguards scrambled out of the way. Just being grazed by the light, the entire group felt as though their bodies had been pierced through, filled with a bone-chilling sensation. And the next second, in the darkness, an eye slowly opened. It swept its gaze across everyone, and nearly all of them felt as if invisible hands were clamped around their throats, suffocating them. Chumley was so frightened he dove behind Franz, who was himself trembling and drenched in sweat. What was happening? It felt as though they had been seen through in an instant. Hikaru blinked. Beside him, Tiara had already floated out on her own, murmuring a quiet woe. As she studied the eye in the darkness. Mr. Pegasus, this couldn't possibly be the legendary. Someone asked, shivering. That's right. Ha ha ha. This is indeed the one from the legends of the King of Duelists, the Millennium Eye. Pegasus said with a playful laugh. The Millennium Eye? Mr. Pegasus, does that mean you found it again? No, it wasn't found. Pegasus shook his head. That is not a true Millennium Eye. No, that is not a physical Millennium Eye. Pegasus tapped his forehead lightly, then continued his explanation. How should I put this? It should be the Millennium Eye's spirit? Millennium items have spirits too. Franz exclaimed. How could a Millennium item possibly have a spirit? Hikaru frowned as he stared at the Millennium Eye in the darkness, hesitating, thinking. Not the Millennium Eye itself, but the Millennium Eye's spirit? Could it be the illusion type? In Hikaru's recollection, illusion was a brand new monster type that had been introduced not long ago. The defining feature of this type was that every single monster bore the unmistakable mark of an eye somewhere on its body. After over a year of research, I gradually discovered that I hadn't regained the talent of mind reading. Rather, I had attracted the power of a lingering specter from the past. This power restored my ability to read minds, but it also left me tormented day after day by mind reading that never stopped. Before, he had been selective about when he read minds, so he only needed to gather critical information at key moments. But now, with automatic, round-the-clock mind reading, it was genuinely exhausting for a man of his age who didn't exercise enough. So, I call it the curse of thousand eyes. A curse? Several Industrial Illusions employees immediately panicked, asking Pegasus how to deal with this. Pegasus shook his head gently. It's all right. Who was Pegasus? A battle-hardened veteran who had seen it all. The God cards, the wicked God cards, the Pyramid of Light, Blue Eyes Shining Dragon. Which of those hadn't been brought into this world by his hand? The curse of thousand eyes did indeed reside within him. But this curse was also an opportunity. Because he had discovered that beyond the layers of mist and darkness lay entirely new possibilities. If he could deal with the lingering specter that circled this place, never dissipating, and overcome the curse of the eye, then he might be able to explore and create entirely new monsters. Entirely new monsters? A type that doesn't exist yet? Is Mr. Pegasus about to create another design legend? Chumley and Franz, the two designers, exclaimed one after another in amazement. Beyond just creating cards, Pegasus truly was the father of dual monsters. He was already thinking about designing an entirely new type. The only problem is, I no longer have that kind of potential within me. Pegasus said quietly, shaking his head, tapping his forehead, then looking at Hikaru. Amaji boy, by now, you should understand why I asked you to come, right? He had actually tried to duel the eye himself, but unfortunately, having not dueled in years, he had been defeated almost instantly. On top of that, his physical condition without the Millennium Eye was notoriously poor. After his loss, he nearly spent a month bedridden. Knowing he couldn't accomplish this himself, he began searching for someone who could do it in his place. And during his duel against the Eye, though he hadn't won, he had learned what type of possibilities those entirely new monsters represented. So he knew he needed someone exceptional, someone who possessed the potential of fusion. And who else could that be? Hikaru gave a tentative nod. Pegasus then spoke. I'm very sorry. I didn't tell you beforehand what you'd be coming here to do. I only asked the Paradox Brothers to invite you here for a duel with me. After all, I hadn't told them about what's in here, either. I watched your duels in the GX tournament. I asked Anselm Boy to observe you up close, and I gave you the Keeper of Dragon magic card. On top of that, I asked Mr. Solomon Muto to use the World of the Forgotten to test your resilience. The results were nothing short of perfect. You are exactly the duelist I need. Only now did Hikaru realize there had been so many layers to all of this. The Paradox Brothers exchanged looks. The older brother shrugged, and the younger one spread his hands indifferently. They had genuinely thought Pegasus invited Hikaru because he wanted to duel a promising young talent. They had been looking forward to watching Pegasus embarrass himself. Though Pegasus had created many new cards over the years, he truly hadn't dueled seriously in over a decade. He could barely hold a duel disc properly. They had really wanted to see Pegasus go up against Hikaru, a powerful, outstanding duelist of the new generation. Too bad that wasn't happening. After laying everything out, Pegasus solemnly bowed and apologized to Hikaru. Amid the surprise of those around him and Hikaru's support as he helped Pegasus back up, Pegasus began to share his thoughts. As the father of dual monsters, it was hard for him to accept that an entirely new type existed right before his eyes and he could only watch, unable to touch it. So he desperately wanted to get past the eye. "Mr. Pegasus, in that case, let me handle it," Franz shouted, already reaching into his pocket for his deck. For Pegasus's sake, he was ready to pull out the Mound of the Bound Creator, a card he had always been too afraid to show Pegasus. But Pegasus shook his head. "Mr. Franz, you are a genius designer. But you are only a genius designer. If it were simply a matter of defeating the eye, there are people in this world who could do it. But what I need is someone who can defeat the eye while simultaneously preserving the new possibilities. That kind of task required a specialist." Other than Hikaru, he hadn't found a second candidate. Even Aster and Jesse, the two duelists he admired most, didn't have the right aptitude for this. Is that so? Hikaru knew that at this point in the timeline, Pegasus probably hadn't seen Jaiden's duels yet. Otherwise, there should have been another option. But honestly, Hikaru didn't mind. He had already heard from Chumley in private that the current Pegasus was frighteningly weak when it came to dueling. An evenly matched duel with him would have been difficult. That being the case, there was no issue. "Mr. Pegasus, you could have told me about all this beforehand so I could have prepared. But since you trust me this much, I won't let you down." Hikaru activated his duel disc, which lit up with a faint purple glow. "Leave it to me." "Oh. As expected of Amaji boy." Pegasus couldn't help but applaud. "Well then." Pegasus reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a card, and handed it to Hikaru with a smile. "This card is yours now. Whether or not you defeat him, I believe the person best suited for this card is you." Fusion Birth. Hikaru's eyes lit up. "Incredible." Hikaru cheered inwardly. This might have been the first time Hikaru received a prize before the duel even started. Fusion Birth was a normal spell that could be searched directly by Keeper of Dragon Magic. Whether or not a fusion was possible, sending 5 cards from the top of his deck to the graveyard was pure profit for his deck. Afterward, Pegasus told Hikaru that if he defeated the eye, then in the future, Pegasus would give Hikaru early access to the cards of the entirely new type. Even better. Who said artists were crazy? This was wonderful. Hikaru stepped into the room. The massive door slowly closed behind him on its own. In the darkness, Hikaru locked eyes with the eye. Then the room suddenly blazed with light. Countless lights illuminated the floor, and Hikaru finally saw the full layout of the room. It was a large-scale dueling arena. The eye, which had been hovering and circling in the air for some time, flew to the far side of the arena. Then it flashed with golden light once more. After shining for a moment, it gradually formed a phantom silhouette. A silhouette of a man in a red gentleman's coat, with long silver-white hair, looking refined and cultured. Pegasus. Outside the door, the designers and employees watching the scene inside gasped in unison. No wonder. No wonder Mr. Pegasus couldn't handle this alone. The opponent was himself. They all exchanged stunned looks. The current Pegasus could never beat another version of himself. From outside the massive laboratory, Pegasus picked up the microphone and spoke to Hikaru inside. Amaji boy, be careful. That eye possesses the ultimate mind-reading ability. Even if you have some magic trick to evade mind reading, it won't work. Hikaru frowned. So that was it. That would indeed be tough to deal with. Hikaru flicked his left wrist, and his dual disc snapped open automatically, glowing with a faint purple light. Across from him, the phantom figure wore a smile, lightly raising its left hand as a translucent dual disc materialized, bearing the distinctive mark of an eye. Duel. Hikaru, LP, 4000. Shadow of the Millennium I, LP, 4000. Chapter 547, Don't laugh at it, it is the future Dragon King. Hikaru went first and drew a card from his deck. He glanced down at the cards in his hand, and his mind began working automatically. Although Hikaru had always presented himself as the type who shouted fusion. Fusion. Fusion, as if it were the only thing in his head, anyone who had spent any real time around him, whether acquaintances, friends, or mentors, understood the truth. Hikaru pursued fusion because he genuinely loved it. But Hikaru himself was an exceptionally rational and calculating person. This was hardly unusual. Before coming to this world, every time Hikaru had played cards against someone, every single card played could have had countless follow-ups lurking behind it. The amount of thinking involved was substantial, and proper preparation was essential. He looked up at the eye. Within the Phantom of Pegasus, the golden eyeball embedded in its left socket was constantly radiating light, as if peering into Hikaru's thoughts. Hikaru didn't know how deep that mind reading could go. But since Pegasus had said that even Hikaru's alchemy couldn't block it, he would simply assume the opponent could see every card in his hand. In modern OCG play, by the second turn both players generally had a clear picture of each other's hand cards and set cards. But that didn't make the game the same as playing with all cards face up. The reason was simple, the classic magical meltdown, ash or no ash dilemma. Activating Magical Meltdown let you search for Alistair the Invoker, while Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring could negate any effect that added cards from the deck to the hand, sent them to the graveyard, or special summon from the deck. The classic question surrounding Magical Meltdown, Alistair, and Ash Blossom was whether to throw Ash or not. If the opponent activated Magical Meltdown and you discarded Ash Blossom, they wouldn't search Alistair. If the rest of their hand couldn't do anything, that one card had stopped them cold, and you could move straight to your own turn. But if the opponent activated Magical Meltdown just to bait Ash, and already held an Alistair in hand, they would just normal summon it and start their plays. In that case, Ash Blossom became a wasted card. Following the same logic. If you held your Ash Blossom and the opponent searched Alistair, then normal summoned it and tried to add Invocation from the deck to their hand, that became the critical moment. You had to throw Ash there. But what if they didn't have Invocation in hand? That was manageable. However, if their opening hand had Invocation but not Alistair, and you could have stopped them by ashing Magical Meltdown in the first place, then Ash became a hand trap that was simply ignored, even wasting a card in your hand for nothing. And if you look back in hindsight and realized that ashing Magical Meltdown would have won the game, you'd be left with nothing but regret. Modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Hand trap interactions were exactly this kind of mind game. What Hikaru excelled at most was leveraging asymmetric information between cards to win those mental battles. Unless the gap in card quality was overwhelming, like a known Tier Laments deck going up against a blind Skystriker, information was always paramount. But now, the opponent could see every card in his hand, while he knew nothing about what the opponent held. That put Hikaru in an extremely uncomfortable position. More importantly, even if Hikaru closed his eyes and let Tiara take over, he could hardly stop thinking. Hearing Tiara select cards and make plays, his mind would immediately start making associations and judgments based on his own understanding. It looks like even Hikaru is struggling. He still hasn't played a single card. Para observed from behind the glass, arms crossed, brow furrowed. It is mind reading, after all. This is Hikaru's first time facing something like that. Of course it's giving him trouble. Chumley looked on with worry. President, just let me go instead. If nothing else, at least let me scout things out for Hikaru first. Franz volunteered again. Pegasus shook his head gently and motioned for everyone to watch. Hikaru scanned the cards in his hand, hesitated for a moment, then decided to just play and see what happened. I activate the continuous spell, Brilliant Fusion. On Hikaru's field, a pure white translucent gemstone slowly appeared, its gentle glow illuminating the room. As this card's activation effect, I use monsters from my deck as fusion material to fusion summon one Gemknight fusion monster with its ATK and def reduced to 0. If this card leaves the field, that monster is destroyed. Hikaru fanned open his deck, quickly selected 2 cards, and sent them to the graveyard. The materials I choose are Gemnite Lapis and Assault Core. The fusion conditions are a Gemnite monster and a light monster. Diamond light burst into color. From above, a green stone descended from the sky. Then an emerald green glow began to shimmer, and a Gemnite with a graceful figure touched down from above. Fusion summon. Gemnite Lady Lapis Lazuli. Lapis Lazuli flicked her cape and made an elegant entrance on Hikaru's field. She was about to say something, but Hikaru had already slapped down his next card, as if in a tremendous hurry. Gemnite Lady Lapis Lazuli, Level 5, Earth, Rock, ATK 0. Spell card, Fright Fur Patchwork. With this card's effect, I add 1 fusion card and 1 Edge Imp monster from my deck to my hand. I add Fusion Substitute and Edge Imp Chain to my hand. Rapid summoning followed by rapid searching. It seems like even Hikaru gets nervous in a situation like this. Para also noticed Hikaru's hurried movements. But he was in no position to look down on Hikaru. Earlier, just having the door opened had made him break into a cold sweat. A single glance from that eye had left him feeling ice running through his veins. The pressure Hikaru was bearing in there was magnitudes greater. A bit of nervousness was perfectly normal. After adding Edge Imp Chain to his hand, Hikaru didn't rush into a fusion. He looked at his hand, pulled 1 card forward, and placed it on the field. Normal summon, Laundry Dragon Maid. Wagga. A small, humanoid blue dragon spread her arms wide, let out a cry, and appeared on Hikaru's field. Laundry Dragon Maid, Level 2, Water, Dragon, ATK 500. Oh. A cute little dragon. Pegasus chuckled when he saw the small dragon. That type of card seems like something Yugi Boy brought from another dimension. I didn't expect Amaji Boy to have one. Hikaru took a deep breath, looked at the little blue dragon on his field, and let the corner of his mouth lift. Knowing someone's mind is certainly the kind of match that makes you break into a cold sweat. But fusion isn't that simple. Uri has been watching me, peering into my strategy this entire time. But what if even I don't know what I'm about to do? I activate Laundry Dragon Maid's effect. When this card is summoned or special summoned, send the top 3 cards of my deck to the graveyard. The little blue dragon pulled out a washboard, flashed an innocent smile, and cheerfully began spinning through Hikaru's deck. Oh! The Paradox brothers exclaimed simultaneously. So that's his strategy. How interesting. Pegasus couldn't help but give a light round of applause as he watched Hikaru's play. Amaji Boy's deck contains monsters like the Shad Doll series that can activate their effects when sent to the graveyard. And even if the eye can see through his hand and his strategy, it cannot see through Amaji Boy's luck. Exactly. If all his tactics had been read, then he would fight with the unknown. With his current spirit adaptability and his synergy with fusion, anything was possible. Just as he was thinking this, the little blue dragon had already tossed the cards. 3 cards flew into the air, enlarging into giant cards for all to see. The moment the cards were revealed, the smile on Hikaru's face froze. Well, that's entertaining. Anselm managed, barely keeping his composure. What happened? Tiara couldn't help asking when she saw the 3 cards displayed in the sky. Hikaru took a deep breath. Future Fusion, Fusion Birth, and Shad Doll Beast. On one hand, it had sent Shad Doll Beast to the graveyard, which wasn't useless. But on the other hand, it had dumped Future Fusion and Fusion Birth, Hikaru's 2 greatest possibilities, straight into the graveyard. The combination of these 3 cards left even Tiara baffled. That shouldn't be possible. How could Hikaru's mills turn out like this? She couldn't make sense of it. Hikaru shook his head. It seemed he'd underestimated Little Blue. Or perhaps there was another possibility: the higher his spirit adaptability grew, the more a card like Laundry Dragon Maid, one prone to messing things up, would mess things up. Hikaru couldn't dwell on it. He opened his mouth and said, "No matter. I activate the effect of Shad Doll Beast, which was sent to the graveyard. Draw 1 card. Next, Gemnite Lady Lapis Lazuli's effect. While this card is on the field, in addition to my normal summon, I can normal summon one monster an additional time. Normal summon, Edge Imp Chain. Spell card, Fusion Substitute. The fusion conditions are 3 monsters on the field and in my hand with different names. 3 lances that judge the world, become the frozen inferno and seal everything in ice. Fusion Summon. Level 9, the dragon that shatters heaven and earth, Trishula, the dragon of icy imprisonment. Frost fell from the sky. Inside the massive laboratory, a layer of ice and snow gradually blanketed the entire field. Countless shards of ice materialized from thin air, and the temperature began dropping wildly. Behind Hikaru, an enormous ice sculpture emerged. Several crimson eyes suddenly flared to life, and then crack! Roar! Grag! HAAA! 3 dragon heads unleashed their pure essence, their destruction, their annihilation, and appeared between heaven and earth. Trishula, the dragon of icy imprisonment, level 9, water, dragon, ATK 2700. The great dragon roared, radiating excitement. Where's the opponent? Where's the enemy, where are they? This one seems like it's been locked away for a long time. Tiara remarked from beside Hikaru. Looks like it just needs a little fresh air and it'll cooperate. Well, that was convenient. Hikaru nodded. Edge Imp Chain's effect. When this card is sent from the hand or field to the graveyard, I add 1 Frightfur card from my deck to my hand. I add Frightfur Patchwork to my hand. A card automatically dissolved into a streak of light and flew into Hikaru's hand. Then I set 1 card. Turn end. I see. Pegasus watched Hikaru's plays and understood. Beyond using unknown possibilities to duel, Hikaru has also prepared himself for the opponent to see through everything he does. If you're going to read my thoughts, then I'll just be completely open about it. Let the opponent know exactly what's in my hand. After all, no matter what, the one thing Amaji Boy will always do is one and the same. Fusion. That was exactly right. Everyone nodded. Frightfur Patchwork's effect searched for an Edge Imp monster and a fusion spell card. Hikaru wasn't the least bit worried about whether the opponent knew he was going to fuse. Instead, he was making the opponent figure out how to respond. All Hikaru had to do was perform different fusions based on whatever board state appeared next turn. Throw the problem back at the opponent and let them figure out how to handle it. And besides, 2700 ATK wasn't something easily overcome. My turn. Draw. What surprised everyone was that the eye actually had a voice. The Millennium Eye glanced at its hand, smiled, and pulled out a card. Pay 1000 life points. Activate the normal spell, Instant Fusion. Instant Fusion? Hikaru's expression changed. You're kidding. The onlookers were equally stunned. Meet all changes with constancy? Then just outright lock everything down. Fusion Summon. Level 1, Thousand Eyes Restrict. A golden eye materialized in the air. Then it began to multiply. Countless eyes became limbs, flesh and blood, and finally, a monster that Hikaru was thoroughly familiar with, one he used regularly, appeared on the opponent's field. Millennium Eye, LP, 4000-3000. Thousand Eyes Restrict, Level 1, Dark, Spellcaster, ATK 0. Thousand Eyes Restrict? Anselm gasped. A devastatingly powerful fusion monster that could deal with nearly any opposing monster in an instant. No. You should say of course it's Thousand Eyes Restrict. Franz shook his head. Since it's mimicking Mr. Pegasus, using that card is only natural. Exactly. Hikaru was only surprised because it had been a long time since he'd seen this monster appear on the opposing field. He had expected the opponent to open with tunes to test the waters. He hadn't expected Thousand Eyes Restrict right off the bat. I activate Thousand Eyes Restrict's effect. Once per turn, I target one monster on my opponent's field. That monster is equipped to this card as an equip card. The Millennium Eye pointed at Trishula. Trishula roared in defiance, refusing to back down, opening its jaws to blast freezing ice and go 300 rounds with restrict. Hikaru sighed. I flipped my set card. Quick play spell, diffusion. Diffusion? Can't be helped. Even with higher ATK, if it gets absorbed, all that attack power just becomes a gift for the enemy. Trishula roared 3 times, then vanished from the field. I returned Trishula to the extra deck. Then I special summon all of Trishula's fusion materials from the graveyard. Gem Knight Lady Lapis Lazuli, Edge Imp Chain, and Laundry Dragon Maid all reappeared on Hikaru's field. Lapis Lazuli, Def, 1400. Chain, Def, 1800. Little Blue, Def, 1600. And now, I activate Laundry Dragon Maid's effect again. Hikaru picked up the top 3 cards of his deck, glanced down at them, and said, I send Fusion Deployment, Shadow Fusion, and Metalfoes Fusion to the graveyard. This time, Hikaru felt pretty good about it. Metalfoes Fusion could be recycled. Fusion Deployment probably wouldn't see use anyway. And Shadow Fusion had a chance of being recovered from the graveyard. At least it hadn't been a disaster. Ha. Suddenly, the Millennium Eye laughed. Every thought in your head has already been read. Human. You're so fixated on getting around my ability, so worried about your thoughts being exposed, that you won't use diffusion to shuffle my restrict back into the deck. You are always going to let that ridiculous little monster use its effect. Don't you dare laugh at Little Blue. She's a monster with a future. Ha! Is that so? Then allow me to show you the future on my side. Spell card, Polymerization. Polymerization? What? It's actually polymerization? The entire group of onlookers cried out in unison, turning to Pegasus. Even Pegasus couldn't help but open his mouth wide at the sight. The fusion conditions are relinquished and one effect monster. I fused the relinquished in my hand with Thousand Eyes restrict on my field. Snap. Whoosh. The phantom of Golden Eyes idol flew to Hikaru's side, staring at the scene in shock. What? What? Thousand Eyes restrict's body began to glow. A layer of gold started to encase it. The power of ancient Egypt grew stronger and stronger. Fusion Summon. Level 1, Millennium Eyes Restrict. Chapter 548, I Will Punish You. Millennium Eyes Restrict, Level 1, Dark, Spellcaster, ATK 0. A monster far more powerful and imposing than Thousand Eyes Restrict. One look at its larger, more ornately radiant body was enough for everyone to grasp its strength. Indeed, from a results perspective, this card was the evolved form of Thousand Eyes Restrict. If it's an evolution of Thousand Eyes Restrict, then wouldn't it have an even stronger effect? Franz swallowed hard. He was already a personal fan of Pegasus, so he was well acquainted with many of Pegasus's cards. And because Hikaru frequently used Thousand Eyes Restrict and Relinquished, 2 cards that had been reprinted many times, to deal with powerful monsters, and because Hikaru's fame in their world kept growing, the cards had become increasingly well known. How simple, convenient, and effective Thousand Eyes Restrict was when paired with Instant Fusion was something every duelist who wanted to study Hikaru's fusion tactics understood clearly. After all, with just a single fusion spell like Instant Fusion, you could deal with one monster no matter how astronomical its ATK. Extremely convenient. An evolution of that monster would only be stronger. That's right. You're thinking correctly. Pegasus's eyes went wide. Hikaru flinched. It took a moment for the others to process, and then they too stared in shock. How is that possible? Pegasus was stunned. You can hear their thoughts through the security door? Ha 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 ha. Pegasus, you're far too naive. That's not like you at all. The Millennium Eye lightly brushed its hair aside, then spoke. I am you, and you are me. You didn't seriously think those doors designed to seal murderous spirits could block me, did you? Pegasus's expression darkened. Besides, you fool, I can hear anyone near you. It laughed openly, looking at Hikaru. So well, before you even entered this arena, I already knew that once you heard I could read your thoughts, you'd resort to a randomized strategy. At the end of the day, you're not the instinctive type of duelist. You're one who relies on strategy and calculated plays. So no matter how random you go, you cannot stand against the power of Millennium Eyes Restrict. The Millennium Eye's golden iris began radiating a dim, flickering light. Because unlike Thousand Eyes Restrict, Millennium Eyes Restrict has no limit of only one equipped monster at a time. No way. Chumlee swallowed. And that's not all. Any monster equipped to Millennium Eyes Restrict has its same name copy's monster effects negated and their attacks forbidden. That's so strong. It's really that powerful? Hikaru frowned and countered. But evolution comes at a cost. In exchange, Millennium Eyes Restrict can't actively absorb other monsters on its own. It can't actively absorb other monsters? If that was the case, it was at least somewhat more manageable. But it sounded like it could still passively absorb other monsters? That was still pretty frightening. Ha. True, that does mean Millennium Eyes Restrict lacks initiative. But did you really think I'd come unprepared? He raised his hand and held up a card for everyone to see. I activate the effect of Millennium Eyes Illusionist from my hand. I discard this card from my hand, targeting one effect monster on my opponent's field. I choose one Eyes Restrict fusion monster or relinquished on my field, and equip the targeted opponent's monster to it as if equipped by that monster's effect. Ha. And this effect can be activated during the opponent's turn as well. Golden light swept across the field. The Millennium Eye looked at Gem Knight Lady Lapis Lazuli on Hikaru's field and said, "You were planning to use fusion substitute for an on-field fusion. And even if your fusion monster was dealt with, you'd use fusion substitute from the graveyard to replenish your hand and create new possibilities. Well then, I'll equip Gem Knight Lady Lapis Lazuli to Millennium Eyes Restrict." Before Lapis Lazuli could deploy her support ability, an invisible hand snatched her up. Then, accompanied by a flash of gold, she transformed into a small acrylic plate hovering above Millennium Eyes Restrict's head. Millennium Eyes Restrict, ATK, 02300. Its ATK went up. Wait, if Millennium Eyes Restrict can equip multiple monsters, doesn't that mean its ATK can climb that much higher? 5 monsters. If it equipped 5, that would be 10,000. And on top of that, the effects of all equipped monsters would be negated. What a powerful effect. But if that's the case, why did it bother explaining Millennium Eyes Illusionist's effect specifically? Chumlee proved himself worthy of being a junior designer valued by Pegasus. Listening to the Millennium Eye describe the card effects, something felt off. Yeah. Franz was also mulling over the effect. Ha. It's simple. Millennium Eyes Illusionist's effect in the graveyard. The Millennium Eye raised its right hand as if displaying a treasure. Millennium Eyes Illusionist has 2 effects, and both of this card's named effects can each be used once per turn. If an Eyes Restrict monster or relinquished is special summoned to my field, this card in the graveyard can be added directly to my hand. I see. Franz nodded in understanding. With that kind of effect, combined with some revival methods, it could recover the card during the opponent's turn and then use its effect again. But why was the Millennium Eye so open about revealing all of this? Hikaru, is it? No wonder the people outside praise you so highly. You truly live up to your claim of being the fusion duelist who knows every fusion there is. I'm impressed. The moment I used this card, its effect flashed through your mind. TCH. Oh. Everyone had a sudden realization. Hikaru recognized these cards. No wonder. It wasn't generosity. Since the opponent already knew everything through mind reading, it might as well flaunt its strength in front of the bystanders. The Millennium Eye pointed at Hikaru's field. Battle. Millennium Eyes Restrict attacks Edge Imp Chain. Green light flashed atop Millennium Eyes Restrict's head. A gemstone beam sliced past Hikaru, shattering the monster. But it should be fine. If chain is sent from the field to the graveyard, he can search for a Frightfur card, right? That way, Hikaru still has follow-up tactics. Para spoke up. That's right. Although Frightfur Patchwork can only be activated once per turn, Hikaru's deck should still have cards like Frightfur Fusion. Naive. The Millennium Eye sneered. Far too naive. It glanced outside the room. Although the specially treated glass prevented anyone inside the laboratory from seeing out, it didn't need to see. It locked its gaze precisely on the Paradox Brothers and chuckled. You think Hikaru would dare use that effect? Hikaru remained silent and shook his head. Why won't he activate the effect? The spectators outside were all confused. Millennium Eyes restricts effect. Once per turn, when an opponent's monster activates its effect, I target one effect monster on my opponent's field or in their graveyard. That opponent's effect monster is equipped to this card. Ugh. Chumley tapped the window. So even if Hikaru uses the effect, it just gets absorbed and becomes an equip that adds 1200 ATK? And because it's equipped, the search effect can't even resolve. Pegasus's brow furrowed deeply. No. I wouldn't choose that card. The Millennium Eye mimicked Pegasus's mannerisms with uncanny precision, as if it truly were Pegasus. Hikaru, if you want to activate that card's effect and retrieve Frightfur Fusion, go ahead. I promise you, I absolutely will not equip that chain. Hikaru was somewhat exasperated. He glanced away and ignored it. It wasn't that he feared Millennium Eye's restricts effect. He recalled from his memory that this card's ruling notes stated it couldn't be activated during the damage step. But from the way it described things, perhaps it could be activated here. Regardless, the real issue was that Hikaru had only brought the Frightfur Patchwork engine for this duel. He had no other Frightfur Fusion cards, so there was nothing left to search for. Seeing that Hikaru wasn't taking the bait, the Millennium Eye casually set 2 cards and didn't seem particularly disappointed. Why? Chumley asked, puzzled. Indeed, why? Several Industrial Illusions employees and newcomers all raised the same question. Why? This thing didn't seem to be bluffing. It's that card. Pegasus suddenly spoke up, explaining to everyone. The monster card A Assault Core. That monster has the special effect of making the equipped monster unaffected by other opponents' monster effects. That effect remains active even when equipped to a card like Millennium Eye's Restrict. Ha! Chumley listened, momentarily confused. But if it's equipped, wouldn't it be negated by Millennium Eye's Restrict's effect? No. Pegasus shook his head gently. Chumley, if you want to become an outstanding designer, artistry alone won't be enough. You need to properly understand card effects and rulings. Millennium Eye's Restricts effect negates the effects of monsters with the same original name as the monster equipped by its effect, and prevents those monsters from attacking. But as an equip card, A Assault Core is treated as an equip spell. So it does have an active effect. Whoa! Chumley and Franz exclaimed simultaneously. I never designed a card this strong. Pegasus leaned his elbow against the glass. A card like this has nothing but raw power. No aesthetic whatsoever. What are you talking about, Pegasus? You designed this card yourself. Relinquished was your creation from the very beginning. The Millennium Eye looked displeased, snorted a few times, and glanced out the window before continuing. Any duelist worth the name would naturally pursue stronger cards. That's how it's always been. You think you can make this world, one that's witnessed other dimensions and encountered spirits, continue developing along the same old path? That's simply impossible. Accept reality. Powerful cards are the truth of this world. The Millennium Eye snorted twice more, then turned to Hikaru. Just like that laundry dragon maid you're pinning all your hopes on. Its pathetic effect is completely useless. It can't carve out any so-called future for you. Now then, turn end. It's your move, Hikaru. Hikaru frowned, studying the 2 set cards on the Millennium Eye's field. Draw. Before you do anything, I activate the continuous trap card, Call of the Haunted. Revive Thousand Eyes Restrict from the graveyard. The Millennium Eye made its second play before Hikaru could act. Thousand Eyes Restrict, Level 1, Dark, Spellcaster, ATK 0. Then, because Thousand Eyes Restrict was special summoned to the field, Millennium Eye's Illusionist returns from the graveyard to my hand. This is bad. Not only is there the evolved Millennium Eyes Restrict, but now Thousand Eyes Restrict is out too. While Thousand Eyes Restrict is on the field, no other monsters can attack. Franz felt the situation was getting hard to deal with. On top of that, Millennium Eye's Illusionist was recovered from the graveyard. Now, if Hikaru Fusion summons a monster, it'll just get equipped to the Restrict by Millennium Eye's Illusionist, won't it? Despite the lab being kept cool by the air conditioning, he was breaking into a sweat watching this unfold. Hikaru looked at the card he drew. Spell card, El Shaddol Fusion. Hikaru glanced at his hand. He didn't currently have a Shaddol monster in hand, so this card couldn't be used right away. In that case, he'd go with Frightfur Patchwork. Grab an Edge Imp and a fusion spell. Build up fusion materials and fusion cards first. Wait. I activate a trap card. Trap card, Mind Crush. What? Hikaru froze. It actually used it? Oh. It really did. That's playing dirty. What do you think you're doing, using a card like Mind Crush? Pegasus completely lost his composure watching some strange entity wearing his face activate a card that felt both familiar and mortifying. Ha. If you possess the power to read minds, then you should capitalize on that advantage. The Millennium Eye didn't care in the slightest how embarrassed Pegasus felt. Mind Crush's effect, declare a card name and activate. If the declared card is in the opponent's hand, the opponent discards all copies of that card. If the declared card is not in the opponent's hand, I randomly discard one card from my own hand. TCH. Hikaru's face twisted with annoyance. So it was Mind Crush. No wonder it revived Restrict first. Mind Crush couldn't be activated without cards in hand. Hikaru. I know. There's only one useful card left in your hand. Discard it. That card is Frightfur Patchwork. Hikaru pursed his lips slightly and tossed Frightfur Patchwork to the graveyard. It wasn't that bad. He'd seen other duelists run Mind Crush before. After all, in the modern era of dueling, there were plenty of search cards. A well-timed Mind Crush could sometimes be even more effective than Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. So what exactly is Ash Blossom? Can't you read my mind? I'd love to claim that I can, but I can only perceive things related to the duel. Is that so? In any case, you can't do anything now. Just end your turn already. It looked supremely confident. True, if all I had were the cards currently in my hand, there'd be nothing I could do. Hikaru rubbed his chin, looking at his cards and thinking. But this is only what's in my hand right now. Question mark. I told you. The future is something even I can't predict. Hikaru looked at the dazed and adorable little blue on his field, a smile forming on his lips. 6 cards have been milled, little blue drew me 1 card, and in the graveyard there's still Metalfoes Fusion, which can be shuffled back into the deck to let me shuffle and draw 1 card. 1 card. What can 1 card possibly do? The Millennium Eye said dismissively. That feeble little monster, and you talk about a future? How laughable. You dare underestimate Little Blue? I'll have to show you then. The possibilities of fusion. Hikaru shuffled Metalfoes Fusion back into his deck, let it auto-shuffle, then drew a card. He glanced at it. Hikaru looked up at his opponent. The opponent's brow twitched. I activate the continuous spell, Temple of the Kings. An ancient temple rose behind Hikaru, its silhouette materializing. Temple of the Kings can send 1 mystical beast circuit on the field to the graveyard to special summon 1 monster from my hand or deck, or 1 fusion monster from the extra deck. But you don't have a Prismsman in hand. you can't use that effect. Then I'll use its first effect. I can activate a trap card the same turn it's set. I'm going to set the card I just drew, then activate it immediately. What? A trap card can be activated the turn it's set? Ha! Hikaru slapped the card onto the field and activated it on the spot. I activate the trap card, Fusion Duplication. Fusion Duplication? This card targets one polymerization or fusion normal spell in either player's graveyard. Banish that card, and this card's effect becomes that spell's activation effect. The card I'm banishing is, of course, the spell card, Fusion Birth. The card that Laundry Dragon Maid had sent to the graveyard earlier. Send the top 5 cards of my deck to the graveyard. If the fusion materials for a fusion are among them, then I perform a fusion summon. How about that, Millennium Eye? This is a fusion that bypasses every angle of your perception. TCH. A card Pegasus gave you? But how can you be certain what those next 5 cards sent to the graveyard will be? Exactly. Hikaru raised his left hand before his face, placed his right hand on his deck, and grinned. Exactly. Millennium Eye, even I don't know what these 5 cards will be. Don't you find that exciting? Exciting? The Millennium Eye scoffed. Your Laundry Dragon Maid milled a full 6 cards and nothing useful came of it. Is this kind of effect really exciting? Ha ha ha. Then let's see these 5 cards. Hikaru drew the top 5 cards from his deck in one swift motion and revealed them. Monster card, Shaddol Squamata. Monster card, Beebuster Drake. Spell card, The Eye of Timaeus. Spell card, Instant Fusion. Spell card, Invocation. 3 fusion spells? How many fusion cards does he have? Anselm still couldn't get over Hikaru's deck being stuffed with fusions. Ah! It's a Shaddol and a light monster. Chumley immediately cheered. The fusion materials are assembled. How is that possible? The Millennium Eye couldn't believe its eyes. Well, what did it expect? He'd milled 11 cards by now. It would be astronomically unlucky to mill 20 and not hit a valid pair. Begin fusion. The fusion conditions are a Shaddol and a light monster. Hikaru thrust his fist high. Fusion summon. Level 8, the Divine Light of Shaddol, El Shaddol Construct. A massive angel blazed with light in the air. Purple radiance shimmered throughout the entire laboratory. And in this moment, I activate the effects of cards on the field and in the graveyard. When El Shaddol Construct is special summoned, send 1 Shaddol monster from my deck to the graveyard. Shaddol Squamatus effect, when this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, send 1 Shaddol card from my deck to the graveyard, other than Shaddol Squamata. Then I activate Millennium Eye's Restricts effect. The Millennium Eye showed no panic, pointing at Hikaru's field. I'll equip your El Shaddol Construct to Millennium Eye's Restrict. Ha! Then don't forget the card I drew this turn. Quick play spell, El Shaddol Fusion. This card can use monsters from my hand or field as fusion materials for a fusion summon. I'm fusing El Shaddol Construct and Laundry Dragon Maid for the water attribute El Shaddol Fusion. Because he now had El Shaddol Anno Utilis in his extra deck, Hikaru could perform the water Shaddol Fusion. But the Millennium Eye didn't simply stop its own play. Heh, don't you forget either. This turn, I recovered this card to my hand, Millennium Eye's Illusionist. You have no monsters in your hand. So without fusion materials, you can't perform a fusion summon. I'll use Millennium Eye's Illusionist's effect to equip that ridiculous little monster to Millennium Eye's Restrict. Millennium Eye's Restrict's eyes locked onto Little Blue. She struggled for a moment, then let out a small wah, and transformed into an acrylic plate, hanging beside Millennium Eye's Restrict's crown. On the other side, El Shaddol Construct fared no better. Her originally massive form quickly shrank into a giant gemstone, hovering beside Millennium Eye's Restrict. Millennium Eye's Restrict, ATK, 2300 5150 600. 5600? Whoa! That's already higher than Five-Headed Dragon. And because they've been turned into restricts equipment, their effects are negated too. The Millennium Eye laughed, as if mocking Hikaru's overconfidence. Well, Hikaru? Your so-called future and so-called interesting possibilities end right here. No. Hikaru held up one finger and smiled. Don't forget. I still have one card's effect that's resolving. One card? Shaddol Squamatus effect. Send Shaddol Dragon from my deck to the graveyard. Hikaru pulled a card from his deck and placed it in the graveyard. New chain. Shaddol Dragon's effect. When this card is sent to the graveyard by a card effect, I can destroy one spell or trap card on the field. No. The Millennium Eye's expression shifted. It should have used Restrict's effect to equip that card instead. No, wait. If it had used Restrict's effect to equip Squamata, then Hikaru wouldn't have needed El Shaddol Fusion and could have used Construct's effect to send Shaddol Dragon to the graveyard all the same. And even if it had used Millennium Eye's Illusionist to equip Construct, Hikaru could have still used El Shaddol Fusion to perform a fusion. Even if it had chosen a Assault Core, the result wouldn't have changed, because a Shaddol Dragon would inevitably be sent to the graveyard to destroy one of Restrict's equipped cards. The Millennium Eye instantly grasped the full chain of interactions. Information is valuable, sure. But an open-hand duel isn't such a big deal. Purple light flashed in Hikaru's eyes. My dueling, my fusion, even performed at random, is nothing to scoff at. In fact, it's better this way. I've already prepared my strategy. But I won't abandon fusion by instinct either. Because only by doing both can I truly reach the ultimate fusion, pursuing higher, ever higher, eternally greater fusion. I destroy the equipped Construct on your field. Construct's gemstone shattered with a bang, and she materialized once more on Hikaru's field. Millennium Ice Restrict, ATK, 5600-2800. Construct's effect. When this card is sent to the graveyard, I target one Shaddol spell or trap in my graveyard. That card returns to my hand. I choose Shaddol Fusion. This is bad. The Millennium Eye suddenly realized something was very wrong. There was a problem here. Why was this happening? Hadn't the very first mill just randomly dumped 3 powerful cards into the graveyard? Fusion Substitute's effect activates in the graveyard. I return Construct to the deck, then draw one card. Hikaru drew a card and glanced at it. Then I activate the recovered Shaddol Fusion. This is bad. The Millennium Eye felt sweat forming on its brow. Maybe it had been too hasty. If it had known things would turn out like this, it definitely would have used Mind Crush to discard Fusion Duplication instead. The future and possibilities? Oh. Chumley watched and finally understood what was happening. When my opponent controls a monster that was special summoned from the extra deck, Shaddol Fusion can use monsters from my deck as fusion material. I send Shaddol Hedgehog and Sea Crush Wyvern from my deck to the graveyard. Hikaru slowly spread his arms wide. The fusion conditions are a Shaddol monster and a light monster. Fallen Angel and Human, Divine Messenger and Central Control Unit, everything converges into one. Manifest. The Fallen Colossus. Hikaru clapped his hands together. Fusion Summon. Level 8, Angel of the Divine, El Shaddol Construct. El Shaddol Construct, Level 8, Light, Fairy, ATK 2800. The ancient Colossus appeared once more in a blaze of glory. This time, Lapis didn't feel shy or timid at all. After a brief moment to adjust to the body, she cheerfully said to Hikaru, Lord Hikaru, use me to your heart's content. Hikaru smiled and nodded at her. It seemed that Lapis Lazuli's earlier defeat had made her want to redeem herself. When Construct is special summoned, I can send one Shaddol card from my deck to the graveyard. I send Shaddol Core to the graveyard. Then, Shaddol Core's effect. When this card is sent from the deck to the graveyard by an effect, I can add one Shaddol spell or trap other than this card from my graveyard to my hand. I return El Shaddol Fusion to my hand. Hikaru flashed the recovered card. Before we knew it, half of Hikaru's deck has been sent to the graveyard. Franz studied Hikaru's thinning deck, lost in thought. Destroy, shatter, recover, transcend. This is truly fascinating. This is the fusion that Amajiboy insists upon. Pegasus couldn't stop himself from applauding. Beyond all foreseen possibilities, he sends cards to the graveyard in random fashion, then performs fusion after fusion. Even if the opponent knows Amajiboy intends to fuse, they can never predict the final outcome. Oof. Big talk. The Millennium Eye remained unconvinced. As long as Thousand Eyes Restrict is on the field, no monster other than Thousand Eyes Restrict can attack. It lowered its voice. Although your construct has the ability to destroy a special summon monster at the start of the damage step when battling it, she can't attack. Next turn, all I have to do is equip her to Thousand Eyes Restrict, and you're finished. Finished, you say? Hikaru lightly tapped his forehead, then spoke. I wonder if you've noticed. Somewhere in the middle of all the randomness, I've already accomplished something without anyone realizing it. Random? Without anyone realizing? The Paradox brothers watching from outside the lab should know what I've done. Done what? The Paradox brothers exchanged a glance, then simultaneously let out an ah, and pointed at each other. Just like Gate Guardian. Hikaru couldn't see what was happening outside, but he could predict it. Right now, in my graveyard, I've assembled A Assault Core, B Buster Drake, and C Crush Wyvern. Ha! That's right. Starting from the very beginning, the material monster I sent to the graveyard with Brilliant Fusion. What? How is that possible? The Millennium Eye stared in disbelief. Impossible. You never planned to do this from the start. Of course not. With my deck, assembling all three Union monsters is ridiculously hard. But Little Blue helped make it happen. Hikaru genuinely hadn't planned for this either. His deck wasn't like Chaz's setup. Gathering all three Union monsters was supposed to be nearly impossible for him. The Millennium Eye choked on its words. Without Laundry Dragon Maid, if Hikaru had drawn Fusion Birth or Future Fusion, it would have hit them immediately with Mind Crush. Everything that followed would have been hopeless. After all, it had known well in advance that Pegasus intended to give Hikaru the Fusion Birth card. It had been on maximum alert. But precisely because Laundry Dragon Maid's effect had sent Fusion Birth to the graveyard, it hadn't paid attention. It never imagined this outcome. Even though Hikaru was the type who overthought everything, the kind of duelist who had already memorized every monster in his extra deck before the duel even started. Well then, it's time for a demonstration. Hikaru raised his hand. The A Assault Core he had obtained in the Union Dimension, the B Buster Drake, a duplicate card gifted to him through his bond with Chaz, and the C Crush Wyvern, a new Union diplomatic partner who had personally come to thank him after the Union forces permanently settled in the Cosmo Dimension following Hikaru's victory over Leo Akaba. Banish all three ABC machines from the graveyard. Supreme Machine that commands lightning, reveal the possibilities that represent the future. Within this randomness, be born. Hikaru opened his extra deck and pulled out a card. The gift and fighting strength of the Union Hanger. Contact Summon. Three mechanical monsters flew into the air, assembled together, and finally transformed into a mechanical dragon with two heads, two thick cannon barrels, and a massive golden set of treads. Level 8. ABC Dragon Buster. ABC Dragon Buster, Level 8, Light, Machine, ATK 3000. The mechanical dragon's cannons locked onto the Millennium Eye. Dragon Buster can activate once during either player's turn, discard one card, then target one card on the field. That card is banished. Hikaru looked at the last card he had drawn and couldn't help but smile as he revealed it. I discard Golden Eye's Idol. The Millennium Eye let out a small sigh. Randomness in the future, huh? Banish Thousand Eyes Restrict. Then, construct attacks Millennium Eyes Restrict. Constructs effect. At the start of the damage step, when this card battles a special summon monster, that monster is destroyed. With a sharp crack, Millennium Eyes Restrict was shattered. Hikaru's fusion monsters and Little Blue all returned to his side. Yeah. The two designers couldn't help high-fiving each other in celebration. Then, realizing the person he was celebrating with was Chumley, Franz snorted, lowered his hand, and shuffled off to the side. Anselm finally let go of his worry, lacing his hands behind his head in a show of forced ease. Meanwhile, seasoned duelists like Pegasus and the Paradox brothers had been applauding Hikaru's duel non-stop. The Millennium Eye's phantom form flickered. Pegasus's silhouette slowly dissolved until only a golden eye remained. Then that golden eye flickered once more before finally transforming completely into the form of Millennium Eye's Restrict. So the spirit had been Millennium Eye's Restrict all along? Hikaru paused for a moment and tried to look out the window, but the glass wouldn't let him see Pegasus's expression. In the end, he turned back and pointed at his opponent. ABC Dragon Buster, direct attack. The two cannons gathered crackling orange-yellow lightning. Then, as if a little blue dragon had transformed into a cannonball, a bolt rocketed forward and struck Millennium Eye's Restrict squarely. GUH. It endured the attack with its completely unequipped body, letting out a pained grunt. Shadow of the Millennium Eye, LP, 3000. Chapter 549, Caused by Resentment. The duel was over. Millennium Eye's Restrict looked thoroughly dejected. Seeing that it didn't want to talk, Hikaru didn't linger in the laboratory. As soon as the doors opened, he walked out. Pegasus thanked Hikaru first, then entered the laboratory himself, clearly intending to have a thorough conversation with Millennium Eye's Restrict about everything that had led to this point. His expression lacked the calm, gentlemanly composure he'd shown when first greeting Hikaru. The fact that his opponent had been Restrict and had used a card like Mind Crush left him looking somewhat embarrassed. Still, embarrassment aside, he was the father of dual monsters, a man who had weathered countless rounds of philosophical debate from all manner of formidable duelists and had his various cards stolen left and right over the years. He quickly regained his composure and prepared to have a proper talk with Millennium Eye's Restrict. After Hikaru came out, Chumley and Anselm excitedly congratulated him on his victory. But they were, after all, members and trainees of Industrial Illusions, so when they saw Pegasus enter the laboratory, they hurried after him despite their lingering unease and fear of the mind-reading ability. That left Hikaru sitting alone on a corridor bench outside the laboratory, reviewing his deck. Today, Hikaru had used a relatively balanced milling deck. Though it contained Gem Knight components, it leaned more heavily on light monster components. After checking through his deck, Hikaru found that no cards had changed. He gave a small nod. If any card in this deck had transformed, he would have felt it was a serious loss. Fortunately, although some of the fusion support spell cards weren't technically fusion cards, none had been forcibly fused away by super polymerization. Hikaru lightly clenched his right fist. Based on how things felt, unless the card in question was particularly irrelevant, his current level of spirit adaptability should prevent super polymerization from forcibly fusing his cards into something else. That was good news. And there was even better news. Hikaru reached into his side deck, pulled out a card, and let the corner of his mouth lift. Beautiful. Claw of Hermos. This possibility he had obtained from Rex Raptor was now finally complete, having become a real, fully realized card. Like the Eye of Timaeus, this was a fusion spell that could perform a fusion summon with a single card. Though the monsters it could fuse into were far less versatile than what the Eye of Timaeus offered, Hikaru was still thrilled. Perhaps the current Hikaru wouldn't invest too heavily in Claw of Hermos components, but since he was walking the path of ultimate fusion, acquiring more powerful fusions was only natural. Dueling against a legendary duelist had finally brought this card to completion. That meant Hikaru was now only missing the Fong of Critias, the one that could transform trap cards into fusion monsters. Since dueling that human called Rex Raptor yielded the base card for Claw of Hermos, the same method should work for obtaining the other cards. Tiara remarked from beside him. Now that you have two, the next one should emerge regardless of who you duel. Hikaru nodded. His duels against legendary duelists weren't over yet. He wondered whether, once he assembled all three, he could obtain Timaeus the Knight of Destiny the same way he had obtained Armityle the Chaos Phantasm. Timaeus the Knight of Destiny required all 3 legendary knights on the field to perform the fusion. As a fusion monster, its ATK equaled the highest ATK among monsters on the field, and it was also unaffected by other cards' effects. Those 2 effects alone were extremely powerful in this world. After all, in this world, highly efficient removal monsters like the Kaiju series were actually quite rare. The better-known ones were really just Lava Golem and Volcanic Queen. Others, like Santa Claus, weren't nearly as well known. Of course, the current issue was that the 2 legendary dragons in Hikaru's possession weren't true legendary dragons. They were purely cards imbued with exceptionally high-quality spirit energy that could assist Hikaru in duels. They definitely couldn't manifest actual dragons or knights and then combine into one the way the 3 originals did in the original series. So going forward, Hikaru would probably need to think about the 3 knights and things related to Timaeus the legendary dragon? The more he thought about it, the more complicated it seemed. It was going to be a long road. But fortunately, this world had quite a lot of legendary duelists. And someone like Rex Raptor, whose soul had been incomplete due to the seal of Orichalcos and had only recently recovered, was actually the exception rather than the rule. Duelists like the Paradox Brothers and Pegasus were classic examples of legendary duelists he could challenge multiple times. So Hikaru wasn't worried about being unable to collect the remaining cards. Besides, at absolute worst, even if Hikaru truly couldn't find anyone else, Rex Raptor was now fully revived. He could always spar with Rex to squeeze out some dual energy. He organized his cards for a while, then put them away and chatted idly with Tiara. Tiara had no interest in human affairs, so she had paid no attention to the dispute between Millennium Eyes Restrict and Pegasus, and hadn't mentioned it to Hikaru beforehand. Millennium Eyes Restrict's mind-reading ability was genuinely formidable. Even a duelist of Hikaru's caliber had his thoughts read during the duel. But Tiara had never cared about such things. The reasoning was simple: whatever she wanted to do, she would do it. In fact, if it were possible, she would announce it to the entire world and let everyone know she was up to something. Compared to that, what she found slightly unfortunate was not being able to have a "you call the shots while I play" duel, or an "I possess your body, your consciousness leaves, I close my eyes and you operate" duel. Because the moment she thought about it, she was certain that strategy would have easily dismantled Millennium Eyes Restrict. Because although she had learned a great deal of dueling knowledge and understood fusion quite well from being around Hikaru, asking her to actually pilot Hikaru's fusion deck was far beyond her abilities. In that scenario, she might not even be able to figure out what a drawn card was useful for. Even if Millennium Eyes Restrict were truly invincible and could read the innermost thoughts of a creation deity like her, it probably wouldn't help. It might even start doubting its own ability. Wait, isn't this Hikaru guy supposed to be a world-famous duelist? Why is his head completely empty? Unfortunately, Hikaru had wanted to challenge himself and try out an entirely new branch of fusion. That such an entertaining opportunity had been missed was a mild disappointment for Tiara, who had nothing to do most days. After all, entertainment like that didn't come along often. But she understood. Hikaru wanted to push toward an even more extreme, more ultimate form of fusion. Relying on brainpower, strategy, and mind games had already become very slow progress. Expanding his horizons through different approaches was an essential step. He had to try, or else walking only one path could never be called absolute or ultimate. After chatting for a while, the laboratory doors finally opened again. Pegasus and his group emerged. Several Industrial Illusions employees looked weighed down, while the Paradox Brothers and Pegasus both wore expressions of relief, as if a great burden had been lifted. Hikaru stood up. "Thank you so much, Amaji boy." Pegasus smiled again, spreading his arms wide in gratitude. Hikaru looked at the open door and asked curiously, "Mr. Pegasus, what about Millennium Eyes Restrict?" Pegasus gave a light clap, then tapped his prosthetic left eye with his right index finger. It had taken up residence directly inside his body? Hikaru was quite surprised. "I must thank you once more, Amaji boy. If not for you, I'm afraid I never could have reached an understanding with Millennium Eyes Restrict." He lowered his hand and spoke again in his signature sing-song tone. Hikaru frowned in confusion. So, Mr. Pegasus, what exactly happened? Well, that is quite the story. He began explaining the details to Hikaru. The situation was actually quite simple. Although Pegasus no longer participated in duels, he had always loved toon monsters and wanted to see toon spirits. That was why he had been training his spirit power. As his training progressed, his spirit adaptability grew higher and higher. After all, he was a world-class billionaire, the father of duel monsters, and a former wielder of a millennium item. His training had gone remarkably smoothly. Under those circumstances, he gradually attracted spirits connected to him. Just as it was for the vast majority of duelists in the world. Heroes attract heroes. Warriors attract warriors. The vessel of the white dragon attracts the white dragon. But here was the problem: the first spirit to appear at Pegasus's side wasn't a toon. It was Restrict. Thousand Eyes Restrict, that ancient dark god, that powerful monster he had designed, finally found him as his power grew. It infiltrated Industrial Illusions, wanting to observe Pegasus's character, only to discover that he had completely abandoned Restrict. Not only that, to prove he had let go of the past, Industrial Illusions reprinted Thousand Eyes Restrict and Relinquished every few years, to the point where even Duel Academy students could toss Relinquished into wishing wells like it was nothing. Because reality differed from expectations, and because of its resentment at being ignored, Thousand Eyes Restrict merged with remnants of the past, fragments of imagery from Pegasus's history, and traces of the Millennium Eyes power that Pegasus had once wielded. It accidentally evolved into Millennium Eyes Restrict, reigniting Pegasus's mind-reading ability and ultimately going berserk. This was my fault. Pegasus gently touched his left eye. He had been so focused on art, cards, and his business, so fixated on seeing toon monsters, that he had neglected the other presents in his deck. This was the result. Cards are innocent. He couldn't help but sigh deeply. Back then, I used Thousand Eyes Restrict because I wanted to defeat Yugi Boy and fulfill my deepest wish. Those intentions had been wicked, but the card itself harbored none of Pegasus's motives. So his favoritism, his neglect of Thousand Eyes Restrict, had undeniably been wrong. And it was precisely because of its resentment toward Pegasus that Millennium Eyes Restrict had been opposing him at every turn, even pulling stunts that made Pegasus want to disappear from the face of the earth. Like reading minds and then using Mind Crush. In truth, after the previous duel where Millennium Eyes Restrict had beaten Pegasus so badly he spent over a month bedridden, Restrict's anger had somewhat subsided. But since Pegasus still hadn't figured out what was going on, Restrict simply continued sulking out of spite. Although Pegasus had picked up on some of Restrict's feelings during the duel, afterward his head had been entirely occupied with the Millennium Eyes power and the possibilities of a new type. He hadn't given much thought to the emotions behind it all. That was also why, despite this matter having absolutely nothing to do with Chumley or Franz, he had brought both designers along anyway. He had wanted to see if this duel might spark inspiration in two promising juniors. It wasn't until Millennium Eyes Restrict revealed its true form that he finally realized what a mess he had been making all this time. Randomness. The future. Amaji boy, you've given me an entirely new way of thinking. Pegasus mused deeply. Perhaps my eagerly awaiting the toons was wrong from the start. Because our future is never certain. The people we meet, the things that happen to us, none of it is guaranteed. Just as I believe dual monsters should have more design sensibility, more artistic beauty, rather than what's happening now, the pursuit of newer, stronger cards driven purely by dimensional development. Pegasus tapped his forehead lightly, clearly in the middle of a brainstorm. Even I, the so-called father of dual monsters, shouldn't presume to declare what dual monsters ought to be. Oh dear. He looked at Chumley and Franz. Both stiffened with tension. Then Pegasus smiled gently. No need to be nervous, you two. What the future of dual monsters design should look like, I'll leave that to your upcoming creations. Yes, President. All right, Mr. Pegasus. Pegasus then turned back to Hikaru and continued. Now then, Amaji boy, regarding the entirely new type, I actually have some leads already. In the future, I should be inviting you back again. Look forward to it. Hikaru nodded eagerly. The illusion type. That sounded wonderful. Then Pegasus drew a card from his deck. And this card wants to go with you. He handed Hikaru a card. A fusion monster. Millennium eyes restrict. Hikaru flinched in surprise, then looked up at Pegasus. This is the card it chose to give you. Unfortunately, with your victory over it, the Millennium Eyes power that had been swirling around this island has completely dissipated. Neither it nor I will ever be able to read another person's thoughts again. But I believe, whether it's the card or myself, we both sincerely feel that this card is better suited for you. For you, the most fusion duelist in the entire world. As he spoke, he spread his arms wide and proclaimed it to the heavens. The Paradox brothers, Anselm, Chumley, Franz, and the several bodyguards nearby all nodded in agreement. Then I'll gladly accept. Hikaru didn't hesitate for a second. He took the card without reservation and said to Pegasus, "Thank you so much, Mr. Pegasus. I promise this card will walk the path of fusion alongside me." Ha ha ha. That is simply perfect. Chapter 550, Importance. After returning to Duel Academy from Industrial Illusions Island, Hikaru finally managed to settle into something resembling leisure. Although people still popped up from time to time wanting to challenge him, interview him, or bother him about one thing or another, Hikaru was happy to accept any duel. He treated them as opportunities to accumulate dual energy from people with different personalities, converting that into different fusion material cards. Perhaps because the new term was approaching, or perhaps because the hype was gradually fading, the frenzy of eager students eventually died down. Hikaru finally had time to spend a normal summer break in the fusion division. With the start of term drawing near, students steadily returned to campus, and the fusion division grew lively again. Classmates gathered to chat enthusiastically about their summer experiences, things they'd seen and heard, and events everyone already knew about, as if they had an endless supply of things to say. Lulu felt slightly out of place in this environment, but as more people arrived, she started feeling less like a stranger and more like a younger student touring an upperclassmen club. "Did you guys see the duel between our president and Jaden?" "Oh. The one against the Paradox brothers, right?" "That's the one. An intense battle against the legendary brothers and the terrifying Gate Guardian." The members discussed the recent duel with obvious excitement. Those who had spent their summer having too much fun and hadn't kept up with the news started asking questions left and right, curiosity clawing at them like a cat, desperate to know the full story. This was when the Fusion Division's massive holographic projector, courtesy of Kaiba Corp, came in handy. A member loaded a pre-recorded video into the main hall's projector, startling Lulu, who had never figured out what all that equipment was for. But after her initial surprise, her mind turned to a different question. Not only did the Fusion Division members use the projector with practiced ease, they had even pre-recorded duel footage, obviously planning to screen it for friends and classmates once the term began. This kind of devotion meant only one thing. Hikaru was truly beloved. Speaking of which, what about the duel with Professor Akaba? Is there a recording? Wait, Hikaru already dueled Professor Akaba? That definitely happened. It was all over the news not long ago. How do you not know? That's kind of rude. Don't tell me you spent 2 months playing video games over summer break. Well, that one, unfortunately, couldn't be recorded. Lulu tilted her head and spotted a boy with a peculiar starfish-shaped hairstyle striding into the Fusion Division. He walked straight to the front desk, pulled open a cabinet, sat down behind the counter, leaned back casually, and cracked open a bottle of juice. "Ha! That's Dimitri," Serena whispered to Lulu. "Don't let him fool you. He's actually super skilled." "What? A duelist on par with Jaden, Chaz, and Hikaru?" Having gotten to know some of the Fusion Division's founding members over the past while, and having watched the duel between Hikaru, Jaden, and the Paradox brothers, Lulu knew those veterans were all exceptional duelists. Not quite that strong." Serena waved her hands hastily, then hesitated for a moment before whispering to Lulu, "Dimitri can replicate Master's deck and use it really well. What? That's incredible! Her exclamation drew quite a few stares. That was when the members noticed that standing next to Serena was another girl who looked exactly like her. Huh? Twins? Serena's little sister? Wait, no, am I actually talking to Serena right now? Although their hairstyles and outfits were slightly different, Serena and Lulu genuinely looked identical, even more alike than most twins, making them genuinely hard to tell apart. Serena laughed, stood up waving, then spread both arms to the side and introduced Lulu with the tone of someone saying, "Behold, the most perfect person in the entire world." That's right. Someone who looked exactly like her, was just as bold as her, and on top of that possessed the wisdom she herself lacked, someone who could make calm judgments just like her master. This was basically a perfected version of herself. A parallel counterpart from the X dimension? Something like that actually exists. She really is just as cute as little Serena. Whoa. So there really are parallel counterparts across different dimensions? Could there be a version of me somewhere too? After getting to know Lulu, the group more or less understood the consistent story Serena and Lulu presented to the public, and couldn't help letting their imaginations run wild. Lulu let out a breath of relief, then curiously asked Serena about what she'd mentioned earlier. She was genuinely surprised. Hikaru's deck was not something a normal person could use. That all fusion deck contained fusion materials, sure, but the ratio of materials was certainly lower than that of spell cards, possibly drastically so. She and Serena had once borrowed Hikaru's deck to try it on a practice table out of curiosity, and no matter how hard they tried, even with their understanding of dueling and their luck, they could barely make it work. And now Serena was telling her that someone could actually imitate Hikaru and even use a similar deck? That was superhuman. It was precisely this revelation that made the normally composed Lulu cry out in shock. While most people in this world didn't exactly have normal deck compositions, even by this world's standards, Hikaru's deck was thoroughly absurd. Being able to replicate Hikaru's deck and actually use it competently was genuinely impressive. Indeed, this was the talent of the person called Dimitri. He had no innate spirit power, no exceptional deck-building ability. But he possessed the talent to take any deck, no matter how abstract or unconventional, and wield it nearly as well as its original owner the moment it was in his hands. Dimitri, is it? On a ship bound for Duel Academy, a man in standard professor's attire stood rigidly upright. He had a muscular build and hair that curved back like the hood of a viper. He was studying a file with meticulous precision. Compared to other exceptional students, this one is thoroughly unremarkable. His grades, his record, his dueling level, all of it is nothing more than mediocre. Even at my own academy, there are plenty of students far superior to him. And yet the task you've given me involves this kid? His name was Viper. Due to the Leo Akaba incident, Professor Growler had decided to evaluate and assess all instructors across every Duel Academy branch worldwide. Apart from the Fallen Angel user he had previously rated at 0, every other professor and teacher would need to visit the main campus for assessment during this period. Of course, the vast majority of instructors had already completed their evaluations with Kaibacorp's assistance. The ones who truly carried weight were the head professors from each academy. Since representatives from all branch campuses would be coming to headquarters for exchange studies next semester, the main campus decided to summon all professors to Duel Academy headquarters for assessment. And so, Professor Viper had a reason he couldn't refuse to come here. Fortunately, he didn't mind the trouble. In fact, this might have been exactly what he wanted. He had been looking for a chance to visit Duel Academy's main campus ever since the GX tournament. Previously, Leo Akaba had invited him to collaborate, but at the time he had been grieving over his son and hadn't paid any attention to Leo Akaba's invitation. But now, things were different. Everything was different. A yellow, glowing phantom suddenly appeared out of nowhere, materializing before him. The figure had no body. Only a left hand that resembled a demon's claw. It looked deeply unsettling. Ah, true. This kid is nothing remarkable compared to those exceptional duelists. But he is indispensable. That's right. This phantom was none other than Yubel. She chuckled coldly. She had struck a deal with Professor Viper, offering the resurrection of his son as payment for his cooperation. After watching Hikaru and Jaiden's duel up close last time, she had recognized how difficult Hikaru was to deal with. If she wanted to prove her singular, irreplaceable love to Jaiden by tormenting his friends, the current Hikaru was a problem she couldn't easily solve. If she could fully revive, she was confident she could take on Hikaru in a duel. But right now, she had only one left hand. In that state, defeating that strange otherworldly god was all but impossible. After studying the situation for a while, however, she discovered two exceptionally promising targets. The first was Rex Raptor, Hikaru's senior and someone who had also looked after Jaiden. The former king of dinosaur duelists and legendary duelist who had volunteered to serve as a free trial opponent for these kids at the Nexus. If she could possess him, she should be able to achieve her desired result nicely. Unfortunately, before she could execute that plan, she learned from Viper that Rex Raptor appeared to have left this dimension entirely, setting off on an adventure in some other dimension. And just like that, her best option was gone. But she always had plenty of schemes and flexible alternatives at her disposal. After careful investigation and thorough research, she discovered another human who perfectly met her requirements, and in some ways was even more suitable than Rex Raptor. That was Dimitri. Dimitri had once dueled Jaiden and even provoked him. Unforgivable. Originally, Dimitri and Jaiden should have been nothing more than passing acquaintances. But this person could nearly perfectly replicate Hikaru's abilities, which earned Hikaru's admiration. He was invited into the Fusion Division and became the division's famous copy duelist Dimitri. Naturally, because of this, Dimitri interacted with Jaiden almost every day. Their relationship had grown closer and closer, to the point where they could genuinely be called friends. Which meant he was both Jaiden's friend and Hikaru's friend. He could mimic both Hikaru's and Jaiden's dueling styles, even using their decks with ease. And most importantly, compared to Rex Raptor, he had one enormous advantage. He was close by. If something happened to Rex Raptor, Hikaru would naturally rush to help, just as he had done with Weevil Underwood according to her research. Hikaru would certainly intervene. But that would take time. He wouldn't be able to join a duel immediately. Dimitri, on the other hand, was close enough. Both Hikaru and Jaiden would suffer because of it. There was no better choice. Of course, Yubel still had to consider combat strength. And Dimitri's strength, while unremarkable at first glance, was actually quite formidable. He could use both Hikaru's and Jaiden's decks. This kid was a born mirror. With that kind of talent, Dimitri could even adapt to her power and directly wield her deck. Even Yubel had been stunned after finishing her research. Honestly, she had never cared about who Jaiden's classmates were. It wasn't until the tag duel between Jaiden and Hikaru at the Chaz group that she realized things couldn't continue this way. Only then did she start frantically cramming, researching the files of every student at Duel Academy. And after carefully reviewing the student body, she discovered that Duel Academy was truly full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers, with quite a few people well worth exploiting. Here was a perfect candidate who met every requirement. He could torment Jaiden and help her revive. The ideal vessel. I'll use this man for the return of my love, Jaiden. In the conference room on the Fusion Division's second floor, Jaiden suddenly shivered for no apparent reason. What's wrong? Hikaru asked casually, eyes still on his book. I just got this weird chill down my spine. Jaiden rubbed the back of his head, feeling uneasy all over. Chaz waved dismissively. It's obviously because you were so excited about possibly seeing Jessie today that you kicked your blankets off last night, you idiot. What are you talking about, Chaz? I slept perfectly fine. Jaiden slammed the table in protest. Then he went back to scratching his back, muttering, "No, it's not exactly a chill. It's just weird. Really weird. Like something bad is about to happen." Is that so? Hikaru looked up at him. Jaden's instincts had always been reliable. He looked uncomfortable, glancing around suspiciously at everything. "You idiot." Chaz sighed. Still, watching Jaden act like this, even he couldn't help feeling uneasy. Jaden's intuition was usually spot on. Could something really be about to happen? Ugh. Jaden slumped listlessly onto the table. That sense of danger had come fast and vanished just as quickly. Unable to figure out what it was about, he drooped back onto the table in mild dejection. Then came a long sigh. "Man, I'm so bored. I wish I could be like you, Hikaru, challenging all kinds of powerful enemies over summer break. And then there's that opponent Mr. Muto invited for you. I'm so jealous." Boredom and strong enemies, huh? Hikaru couldn't help snapping his book shut. "In that case, let me tell you the real reason I called you both here. Jaden, Chaz, would you two like to come with me to find Professor Banner?" Both of them turned to stare at Hikaru in unison. "The spellcaster domain has been found?" Jaden had never forgotten about this. Hikaru nodded. There might be some kind of trial or challenge waiting for them. After all, they had encountered a duel in the warrior domain. So this time, Hikaru decided to invite the two most dependable teammates he had. Just in case. That wraps up this part of What If Fusion Deck User in a Different Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. Thanks so much for listening. As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned. Quick reminder. The series What If Fusion Deck User in a Different Yu-Gi-Oh! GX will be going on hold soon, since we're nearly at the end of the story. So now, I need your help picking the next project for the channel. I'm currently deciding between these 3 fanfics. What if creating the strongest Strawhat crew by reading manga? What if Reincarnated in Bleach as Toshiro Hitsugaya? What if Reincarnated in Marvel as a gamer? Please vote in the poll and let me know which story you'd like to see next. I'll take the top pick and start working on that series next. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well. See you in the next one.